Welcome to Pamoja Podcast, a ministry of Life of Christ International Ministries, the place where stronger lives are built, faith is strengthened, hearts are encouraged, and Christ-centered homes are shaped through ordinary conversations that become extraordinary encounters with God's truth. One conversation, one story, one revelation at a time. As I look back at the story my father told me many years ago, I realized something that escaped my attention for a long time. He wasn't simply describing a house. Every detail he mentioned had a purpose. The house was in the middle of a forest. It was warm. It had a strong foundation. The door could only be opened from the outside. And then, almost as if it were just another detail, he told me that the windows were sealed. For years, I never questioned that statement. I simply accepted it as part of the story. But after nearly 2 decades of marriage, after storms, after victories, after failures, after learning what it truly means to protect a covenant, I found myself returning to that one detail. Why did my father insist that the windows were sealed? Why mention the windows at all? Why not simply say the house was secure? Why emphasize something that, at first glance, seems so ordinary? Today, I believe I understand. Because every house has windows. Every marriage has windows. Every family has windows. Every heart has windows. And whatever enters through those windows eventually changes the atmosphere inside. There is something I've learned over the years. Most people fear the storms outside. Very few pay attention to the openings inside. We spend so much energy trying to stop what is happening around us. The difficult economy, the pressure at work, the opinions of people, the temptations of the world, the uncertainty of tomorrow. But the greatest danger has rarely been the forest surrounding the house. The greatest danger has always been what finds its way inside. Because once the battle enters the house, it is no longer happening around you. It is happening within you. Growing up, there was a house in my neighborhood that everyone knew. It wasn't abandoned. At least, not in the beginning. It wasn't haunted. It wasn't mysterious. It was simply broken. The first thing people noticed wasn't the roof. It wasn't the walls. It wasn't the foundation. It was the windows. One after another, they had cracked. Some had shattered completely. Others had been left partially open. No one repaired them. At first, nothing dramatic happened. Just a little breeze, a little dust, a little rain. Nothing that seemed urgent. Nothing that demanded immediate attention. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The wind continued entering. Cold air settled inside. Moisture began to damage the wood. Leaves gathered in the corners. Insects found their way in. Then animals. Little by little, the atmosphere changed. Eventually, that house no longer looked like a home. It looked like a warning. And everyone who walked by understood something without anyone having to explain it. That house had not been destroyed in one day. It had slowly welcomed destruction. That image has stayed with me for years because marriages rarely collapse overnight. Families rarely break apart in a single moment. Faith rarely disappears in one decision. Most destruction enters gradually, quietly, patiently, almost unnoticed, until one day when people ask, "What happened?" And the answer is often much simpler than they imagined. The windows were left unattended. One sentence has settled deeply in my heart. I believe it captures this entire revelation. A house rarely falls because of what strikes it. It falls because of what it allows inside. Think about that. Storms hit every house. Jesus himself said that the rain falls, the floods come, the winds blow against every house. The difference was never the existence of storms. The difference was what remained standing after the storm had passed. Why? Because one house had been prepared, the other had not. This is where I began seeing my father's wisdom differently. The sealed windows were never about keeping fresh air out. They were about protecting the atmosphere within. Because atmosphere is precious, peace has an atmosphere, joy has an atmosphere, trust has an atmosphere, prayer has an atmosphere, love has an atmosphere, unity has an atmosphere. An atmosphere changes the moment something foreign is allowed to enter. Have you ever walked into a room where people had just argued? No one says anything, yet you can feel it. The atmosphere speaks. Have you ever entered a home filled with peace? Children laugh, people smile, conversations are gentle. There is rest. The atmosphere speaks. Atmosphere is invisible, but it is powerful, and it is shaped by what is permitted to remain inside the house. My father understood something I would only understand years later. The forest was never the greatest threat. The house already knew there would be storms. It had been built for storms. The walls were strong. The foundation was deep. The fire was burning. The threat was never outside. The threat was anything that crossed the boundary between outside and inside. That boundary was the window. How many marriages have been weakened? Not because the couple stopped loving each other, but because something entered the atmosphere. A disappointment that was never discussed, a comparison that quietly grew, an offense that remained unresolved, a voice that should never have been entertained. Not dramatic, not obvious, just enough to change the climate. Peter writes these words, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." Notice what Peter does not say. He does not tell us to fear. He tells us to stay alert, because vigilance is part of love. We lock our doors because we value what is inside. We protect our children because they are precious. We guard our hearts because they belong to God. Protection is not fear. Protection is stewardship. Perhaps that is why Proverbs tells us, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Notice the language. Guard it, not because God cannot protect you, but because he has entrusted something valuable to your care. Just as Adam was placed in the garden to work it and to keep it, we have been entrusted with our homes, our marriages, our families, our hearts. God protects, but he also calls us to watch. As I reflected on my father's story, another thought came to me. Maybe the reason the windows were sealed wasn't because the people inside feared the forest. Maybe it was because they loved the atmosphere inside the house too much to risk losing it. That changes everything. They were not living in fear. They were living with wisdom. There is a difference. In our next conversation, I want to tell you another story. An old story passed down by elders. It is the story of a husband and wife who welcomed a traveler into their home. He did not arrive carrying weapons. He arrived carrying kindness. He did not force his way in. He was invited. And by the time they realized why he had come, the greatest damage had already been done. Because sometimes the enemy does not enter through violence. Sometimes he enters through permission, and that may be the most dangerous window of all. Until next time, remember this: you cannot control the forest, but you can guard the windows of your house. And what you protect today will shape the atmosphere your family lives in tomorrow.